And tonight we have four speakers. We're starting off with Graham, and then after that we have three guest speakers from our group, Helen, Liz and Wendy, who will be giving their own take on this subject. And maybe we can learn from this as well how we can better work with our own birth charts. Might give us some ideas how we can make our homes and gardens more in tune with our astrology, and also maybe make us think how one approaches this when one is sharing a house with someone who might have quite different astrology, but hopefully some good synastry. And yeah, I noticed tonight the moon is in Cancer and trine Neptune, so that sounds all very good for this subject matter. And also mention I'm in the process of moving as well, so I might be particularly useful for me, this talk. So I'm going to now hand over to Graham, who's going to do the first part of the session. Thanks, Graham.
Tonight it's really in the way of an experiment. You know, I don't want to prejudge it really. I just want to see whether there is a link and whether you think there's a link between your own chart and your home and your garden, if you're lucky enough to have a garden. And as Chris says, you know, in a way, these things should be reflections of who we are. And of course, if we're in a partnership or a family, then there's going to be the influence of those people's birth charts as well. So one might want to look at, you know, both people's birth charts if we're in a partnership, or even a composite chart perhaps, or even a Davison chart, which is like a composite chart. It's really a third chart set for the midpoint in space and time between the two people's birth places and times. So it's different from a composite chart, but there are many ways in which you can experiment with this idea. And traditionally, when you think of the home in a birth chart, you think of the moon and also the IC or Imam Coeli, which is at the bottom of the chart. Sometimes it's called the nadir, and it's the place where the sun would be at midnight. So, you know, below our feet somewhere. So it's symbolically the kind of base of the birth chart, the foundation, if you like. And it represents not just our home, but our family, our background, our heritage, our tribe, perhaps, even perhaps one's ancestors. It's the place where one has come from. But it also says something about the kind of home, perhaps, that we choose if we choose where to live. And it may say something about the location of where we live or where we choose to live. So how is that different from the moon? Well, the moon obviously represents our inner selves, our thought, our feelings, our emotions, our habitual responses, what makes us feel secure in life. And of course, the home is or should be a place of security, a place that makes us feel comfortable. And you know, we can experience a lot of problems when our home isn't a place of security and comfort. So perhaps in a birth chart, the moon shows us what we do to our homes to make it more of a reflection of ourselves. But anyway, these concepts are up for discussion, as we'll find out this evening. Now, of course, as with anything in astrological, you can take it further and further and go on ad infinitum. So you might look at not just the sign on the IC, but the ruling planet and where that's located, and whether there are any aspects to that, for example. But you'd certainly be interested if there are any planets in the fourth house. And similarly with the moon, are there any planets closely aspecting your moon? And what sign is your moon in? Maybe even what house is it in, whether that has any bearing on the situation. So anyway, I'm not going to go into any more detail. I think I'm going to leave it fairly open because this, as I say, is a bit of an experiment. But I'm going to show some examples of this idea. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to look at the chart and home of a filmmaker, and then the charts and home of a married couple, one an artist and muralist, and the other, his wife, an artist as well, both very famous people. So I'm going to start with the filmmaker Derek Jarman, who some of you will be familiar with. Now, he passed away in the mid-1990s. He died of AIDS, and he was quite a famous film producer, film director in the United Kingdom. And he rose to prominence in the 1970s when he designed sets and helped the Devils on. But his own first film was called Sebastiani, about Saint Sebastian, and it was one of the first feature films that dealt with homosexual themes in a very overt way, and he sort of gained a cult following. And then he directed a film called Jubilee, which was a punk film and was very much of the punk times of the late 70s. And then he directed a film called The Tempest, based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, which was very lyrical and imaginative. And I think Tilda Swinton was in that film. And he had a very good friendship with Tilda Swinton throughout his life. And another film that he directed was Caravaggio, about the Renaissance artist. All brilliant films, really. So here's a look at his birth chart. Now, this is the whole of his birth chart, obviously, but I just want you to bear in mind what I was talking about earlier, which is looking at the IC. So his IC is in Taurus, and he has a planet, or two planets really, conjunct or very close to his IC. He's got Saturn in Taurus and Uranus in Taurus. And his moon is or was in Cancer. And we might also consider the ruler of his IC, Venus. But the key thing to remember is his IC in Taurus with Saturn and Uranus there, and that moon in Cancer. And the moon is conjunct Pluto. It's a dissociate conjunction because they're in two different signs, and it's quite loose, but it would still, by most people would say that was still conjunct. So now this is where he lived. This is the house that he bought, and it's in a place called Dungeness on the south coast of England. And the Dungeness is a very odd place. It's a large spit of sand, really, sticking out into the sea, and it's quite bleak and windswept. And he bought this old fisherman's cottage called Prospect Cottage. So this small kind of tin shack, really, wood shack with a tin roof, was where he chose to live. And it's located near a nuclear power station. Now, I've put his chart up here, a simplified version of his chart at the top right, just as a reminder. So you can see the IC in Taurus. Now, he had a love of gardening, and he created a garden around this house, and it's a very unconventional garden, particularly so for its time. In 1986, he bought this house, and he created a garden on this windswept, unforgiving piece of land, planting plants that were happy in that kind of environment, but also populating it with found objects that he found on his walks around Dungeness. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So here you can see the nuclear power station in the background. So he's very close to it. So if there was any accident in that nuclear power station, he would definitely be for it. And here's another picture of his garden. So you can see some of the interesting objects, kind of washed up, rusting metal objects that he found, and these lovely bits of driftwood that he kind of stuck into the ground like totem poles. And so, some people might not have regarded this as a garden, but to him, it was definitely a garden. It was a place that he was creating. So there's a kind of a Taurian element that he was creating this garden around his home, and that he was interested in the land. And you can perhaps see in that Saturn in Taurus the kind of bleakness and the unforgiving nature of the landscape. It's a very harsh landscape, particularly in winter time. Very cold, very strong wind, very bleak, and very isolated, really. There are not many houses there. It's not a village. It's a kind of loose community of few and far between shacks and small homes. But I think you can see perhaps there is something Taurian about it, but it captures that Saturn and Uranus in the fourth house, I think, particularly being in Taurus. It's a hard but unusual place. But, it was also a kind of cozy retreat. The moon in Cancer, it was his studio as well, where he painted, because in addition to writing and directing films, he painted. But you can see here the beautiful plants that were growing and still grow to this day at his house. After his death in 1994, his cottage was bequeathed to his partner, Keith Collins. But after his death in 2018, there was a crowdfunding campaign, and in April 2020, it was bought by a local art group to be kept as a museum. So my next example, and I mentioned it's a married couple, it's Frida Kahlo, the Mexican artist, and her husband, Diego Rivera. So this is a wonderful photograph of Frida taken by her father, who was a photographer. And Frida was an innovative artist, and her art touched on some very difficult and very personal subjects. She was a very passionate person, and she lived very passionately. But she had some great tragedy in her life. She had a terrible accident when she was quite young. With a friend on a bus, and at a crossroads, she got off the bus, got onto a different bus to look for her umbrella, which she had lost. And almost immediately, the bus was rammed by a trolley, presumably a trolley bus. And several passengers were killed, and she was very badly injured. And she had dislocated shoulder, a broken hip. She had vertebrae smashed. She had numerous injuries, and she was in hospital for a long time. And then she was bedridden for a couple of years. And, this was a terrible blow for her. I mean, obviously, it would be for anybody, but she dreamt of being a doctor, and this kind of put paid to that. And she was in great pain. And at one point, to facilitate the healing of her spine, she was put into a near full body cast that kept her immobile in bed as well. And here is her chart. And again, just looking at her IC down here, it's in Scorpio. There's nothing in her fourth house. And her moon is in Taurus. And the ruler, if you take the modern ruler of Scorpio to be Pluto, Pluto is up here conjunct Venus. Now, she met Diego Rivera, who was an artist and muralist. They were both communists, by the way, so that was another thing that linked them. and they married. They had a very tempestuous relationship, and in fact they divorced and then remarried. And but they were kind of lovers, and I think they each had different lovers throughout their lives and throughout their marriage, or marriages I should say. So it's very kind of on off, but they were both highly creative people. And here's an example of Frida's art. This is a detail of a painting called Broken Column, and you can see the pain, the physical pain that she's expressing in this painting of herself. The broken column referring to her spine being damaged, and it's a picture of pain, and but it's very honest and true. She's looking directly at us, and she's confronting us with the physical reality of her condition. And much of her art was in that vein. It showed, her bleeding, her, operations she had, but she also did other paintings where she's portraying herself as very beautiful and very fashionable and adorned with flowers and objects of beauty. So she was a very interesting and complex painter. And here's a mural, a piece of street art, which shows her face, and it's adorned with flowers and objects. That's very much in her style. And so she's become an icon, really, an icon of feminism, an icon of artistic passion, certainly a Mexican superstar, really. And she's been referenced by many artists and many famous people. For example, Madonna, in her clothing and her songs, have referenced Frida Kahlo. And there was that wonderful film that came out probably about 15 years ago, starring Selma Hayek as Frida Kahlo. The film was called Frida, a fabulous portrayal of her life. Her husband, Diego Rivera, he was a painter. This is a painting he did in his earlier style. And this is El Picador. And so it's quite an accomplished painting. But his style changed very much. This is a mural he did for the Rockefeller Plaza in New York when he was at the height of his fame as a muralist. And he was invited to create a mural at this kind of temple of capitalism, if you like. And the Rockefeller was so appalled by the fact that he'd included Lenin here that he ordered that he wouldn't accept the mural, and he ordered it to be covered up. And so it was covered up. And then it was actually destroyed, which is shocking and appalling. And this photo is actually a photo of a recreation of the mural that Diego Rivera did. He may have done it with somebody else, but it was recreated based on Diego Rivera's own photographs of the mural. So you can see it pretty much as it had been. So this is Diego Rivera's birth chart, and you can see that his IC is in Libra, and he has Uranus very closely conjunct the IC at the bottom of the chart, and he also has Jupiter in the 4th house in Libra, and his moon is like Frida's in Taurus. And this is another painting that he did, and this is when he was painting in the Cubist style. So this painting of Ramon Gomez de la Serna, a fellow Mexican artist. Now this is the house that he commissioned by a famous Mexican architect called Juan O'Gorman. And he was a modernist architect in the 1920s. and he created houses that were in the kind of European Le Corbusier style of modernism, but they referenced Mexican folklore, particularly in their colours. And so this is a very, I mean, it still looks very modern to this day, but in the 1920s and early 30s, it must have looked incredibly modern. You can see on the left here a simplified version of his chart showing his IC in Libra, and he had Uranus on the IC, very close to his IC. And he had moon in Taurus, just like his wife, Frida Kahlo. Her moon is in late Taurus, his moon is at about 17 Taurus. And this house, I feel, reflects very much his birth chart in particular, because of that Uranus in Libra. He built it for he and his wife to live in. And you'll notice it's very much a house of two parts. And that's because the red building, the red and white building on the left is where he lived, and the blue building on the right is where she lived. And they were connected by this bridge. And that is how they walked to each other's houses, via this aerial bridge. Now that, to me, is rather Uranian. And it's also kind of rather Uranus in Libra in a way. It's kind of almost symbolic of an interesting kind of marriage, an interesting partnership, that they're very much kind of together but separate, and that both of those things are very much out there in the public eye, if you like. One sort of a revolutionary element that might not be apparent at first glimpse is that the fence along the front is actually made of cacti, and this was actually would have been appreciated as a revolutionary symbol of a kind of nationalist symbol, having a cactus fence to one's house. So that was a deliberate reference to revolution. And also there's a kind of industrial style to the building, and that was deliberate as well, because the architect, Joan O'Gorman, was also very much interested in the social aspect of housing and housing for workers. So this house is referencing industry as well. It's not a typical residence, or smart person's residence, if you like. It's very modern, and it's referencing different things in a very kind of overt way. And this house is in Mexico City, and this is the view across the bridge to Diego Rivera's house. So this is the where they would walk to each other's abode. And this is actually Frida Kahlo's own home. This is where she was born. It's her family home called Casa Azul, the blue house. And remember that the house that we just looked at, her side of it was blue, which is a deliberate reference to this house. And I said that they had a very tempestuous relationship. And she, I think, lived with Diego in the modernist house for a few years only, but then moved back to this house. And she kind of moved backwards and forwards, but spent most of her time in this house from then on, throughout the remainder of their married life. And so they both have moon in Taurus, and I think maybe that's why they both live in quite artistic houses. I didn't have a photograph of the interior of the modernist house, but it was full of artworks, as you might expect. It housed each of their studios, so it's full of art. And as was this house, where she spent most of her time as well. But I feel that this house, and we can see another shot of the inside, the inner courtyard, is more it's more natural, if you like, because obviously it has trees and plants in it, in its garden. And this is a rather unusual object in the garden. It's a tomb. I'm not sure who's buried there, but it's a representation of a Mexican pyramid. So you can see the steps. So it's like a Mexican stepped pyramid. And the interior of her house was full of her art, as you might expect. And it also functioned as a studio full of art objects. She was a great collector of unusual objets, as you can see over here. And here's the wheelchair that she used. I don't think she used wheelchair all the time, but she probably had to rely on it sometimes because of the injuries that she'd suffered. So I feel that she probably wasn't entirely comfortable in the modernist house, this one. And I suspect that's because really it was more Diego Rivera's house. When she left it, he stayed in it and he lived in it throughout the rest of his life, until he died in the mid to late 1950s. I suspect that's because it was more reflective of his birth chart and his Uranus on the IC, whereas she didn't have Uranus on the IC. And so I think perhaps it was less somewhere where she wanted to spend her days. So that's a couple of examples. So I have great pleasure in handing you over now to Helen. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Graham. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was really interesting to hear about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera's houses. And I was thinking about the fact that her IC was in Scorpio, and the ancestral element of that pyramid in the garden.
Yeah.
Because as you can see here, I also have the IC in Scorpio. And I'm going to talk about, we're going to move from Mexico to the land of the midnight sun, actually. So it was also interesting, Graham, that you mentioned about the IC being where the sun is at midnight, because the house that I'm going to share and talk about is a house that's in Sweden, and it's where my mother came from, and I've been fortunate enough to inherit this house. But first, I'm just showing you here the aspects of my chart that seem to me to be relevant to the house. As Graham mentioned, the moon is important in terms of homes and gardens. So my moon is in Capricorn. And as I mentioned, my IC is in Scorpio with Neptune on the IC. And there's also put in my Mercury, which is in Cancer up there in the 11th house, and it's opposite the moon. Neptune is sextile the moon. Anyway, let's move on to the image of the house. There. That's the house from the water. So this is, here's the house up here, this little yellow house nestled among the trees. And as I said, this is in Sweden on the east coast, and it's on a bay of the Baltic Sea. And it's a long and deep bay of the Baltic. It's very deep. And this is the southern side of this bay. And the northern side is just open farmland. There aren't really any houses on the northern side. This is a close-up of the outside of the house with my son cleaning it. We painted it together this summer. I was lucky enough to be able to be there for 2 months, and my son was there for a month, and we cleaned it up and painted it. As you can see, it's yellow. Not quite sure if there's significance to that, but that was, my mother chose the color. And my mother's chart obviously relates to mine. Her sun was in Capricorn, and my moon is in Capricorn. And this is the view from the deck of the house. So you can see the bay there, and the northern coast there, which is farmland, as I said, but it used to be, there were copper mines there in the past. And to the left in this picture, if you went by boat or swam far enough, you would get to one of the Hansa League ports, actually. It was a very important trading center in the Middle Ages, and it was eclipsed by Stockholm during the Renaissance in the 1600s, when a fortress was built further to the right. So if you were to go to the right, which would be heading east, you would get to this narrow strait, which could easily be blockaded, preventing ships coming in from, well, Russia was the main fear for people, that Russia would invade, which indeed they did invade in the 1700s. They did invade Sweden. So that's still a fear today. And it's a bit of a joke, but there's a serious element to it, that people around here kind of say, oh, just look out for U-boats, look out for Russian submarines in this stretch of water. So I feel as if this really does relate to my chart, this Neptunian element. I absolutely love being this close to water. It feels very, very comfortable to me, particularly this kind of water. It's brackish water. It's slightly salty. It's very, very comfortable to swim in. There usually are no huge waves. I have lived in California, and the water, the sea there has such enormous waves that you just can't swim in it unless you don't mind being, thrown under the water by the waves, unless you're a surfer. I much prefer this kind of still water. So it's a wonderful place to be and to sort of come. It's sort of like a safe harbor where you can kind of gather your energies and then go back into the real world. It's how I feel about it. This is the inside looking out, and this isn't actually that representative of most of the soft furnishings in the house, because most of them were made by my grandmother. She made rag rugs where you weave old fabrics, from old clothes into rugs. And that the fact that her rugs and also those old chairs were in her house are there, makes it much more homely and much more significant for me. And again, I think that is that is an expression of that Neptune in Scorpio on the IC. It's that connection with the ancestors. I think I feel that very strongly when I'm there.
Thank you, Helen. That's really interesting, and what a stunning place. And I love the fact that it's Neptune in Scorpio on the IC, and that you're living next to this deep body of water that has a kind of dark history to it, isn't there? With the invasion and the U-boats, there's that kind of scorpionic depth to it.
That's true.
It's not just a pretty place. It has hidden depths, literally, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, there's another story connected with that. If we've got time.
Yes, please do.
There was a time in Sweden's history, actually it was the 1600s, when one of the kings was king of both Sweden and Poland. And, it caused all kinds of trouble because Poland was Catholic and Sweden was Protestant. And there's a story anyway, that a ship carrying 12 silver apostles from Poland, these were statues of some of the apostles, sank in this water. So supposedly these 12 silver apostles are lying there in the deep water and could perhaps be found by somebody seeking treasure one day.
Wow. That's incredible, isn't it? I mean, that's got it all. Neptune, Scorpio, the IC, the whole lot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Neptune, kind of spirituality, the apostles.
Yes. Yes.
Having sunk to the very depths. It's just amazing. So thank you very much, Helen. We're now going to pass on to our second guest.
Hi, right, I'm Liz. So thank you for letting me participate. And that was really interesting. Your house is so beautiful, Helen. The water just wonderful. So we're moving on to something quite different. And this is where I live in the UK. And so I'm just starting with my chart on the left and a picture of the close where my house is. So my house is the brick 3-story house that you can see on the right hand side, and we bought it from new 18 years ago, and it's a very small mews close. You can see it's like got pavias, the houses are right on the road, everyone's very friendly, everyone knows each other, bar 2 people. We're the same people that have moved in, so we've all seen our kids grow up. So yeah, it's really lovely, friendly, close to live in quite a big village. So I've just picked out from my chart some of the things that I think my house and where I live reflect me. So hopefully that was right. So I'm going to start with the Ascendant and Jupiter, of course. Where else? And so I've got my Jupiter in Taurus on the Ascendant. So you can see from that house, it's very typical of these big house, small garden. Which has worked well. The kids used to play in the close when they were little. But I've grown to love gardening as I've been here, and I love to grow my own food. I love to cook for my family. So as the years have gone on, the gardens just kind of got overtaken by vegetables and small fruit trees. And then last year with lockdown, I ran out of space in the garden, so I overtook the drive. So you can see there's some planters, the grey planter there, and actually it goes all the way down the drive, and I've got 4 planters and about 4 potato buckets. And my neighbours actually laugh. They call me Barbara from The Good Life because I've kind of turned suburbia into growing, which is quite funny. So then the next thing that struck me about my chart was the moon in Gemini. And it sat there, and so I gathered up the books on my downstairs coffee table and added them up there. And then I've got another 3 books on the go upstairs. And I absolutely love reading. I love learning. I started doing batch flower remedies back in 2000. Then I did my homeopathy course. Now I'm a student of astrology. And there's a nice fiction book there as well. So that's very, I love to learn. I love to learn new things. And then also we've got Gemini in the 2nd house. And I actually work from home. I've worked from home since 2006. So it's not a pandemic thing at all for me. And I do many different things, multitask every day for different companies. So you can see there as well, I've got my laptop and my desktop. I've always got at least 2 screens going, juggling different things. I can be doing, filing a company's house return, doing a Facebook marketing post, booking a patient in to see Jeremy, dealing with myriads of things that come in, reading papers and pre-seeing them for him. So it's very, very Gemini, what I do, very Gemini in second house. And as you can see, hopefully on the screen on the right hand side, one of those two organisations, I work for Jeremy and Camilla Share, and one of them, great privilege, is that I've been part of Homeopathy for Health in Africa since it actually started in 2008. I was part of the due diligence that set it up, which follows very nicely onto Sagittarius in the 8th house, which makes me smile because I do the admin and run the finances for other people, not necessarily for me. And of course, HHA by its very nature is Homeopathy for Health in Africa, which actually the hub of where it gets run is actually my house. I run that from here. So there's a lovely picture of me with Camilla and Jane in Africa. I've been out there a couple of times, and in the middle, I've taken some pictures of some beautiful African artwork that we've got. They're actually on our landing where we've been on safari when we've actually been out in Africa, which I absolutely love. So then the last slide I wanted to share with you is actually my 5th house, which is Leo. And you can see here I've shared some pictures. One of them is, you can see the back of my house. So we actually put that extension on our house, and light is really important for us. So you can see it's got massive bifold doors. There are actually 6 huge Velux windows in there. And we've created this huge living, dining, social space, which has been the hub of where the kids, they all bring, you'll have 3 boys, all of their friends are here, you know, barring lockdown, we've always had a house full of people. It's a very bright house. It's a very fun house where a lot of people are, very sociable space, which I think reflects that Leo that's there. And also, obviously the planets that we've got there, we've actually got Mars sitting in Virgo, and I do like my house to be quite precise. I wouldn't quite say OCD, but it has to be just so. And I did laugh because I've got my cushions there on my sofa in the extension, and they have to be in the right colour order. And so when the lads have all been round and they've all stayed over, and they all end up everywhere, and in the morning I'm like, no, we have to go grey, pink, blue in that order. So that made me laugh. And then the other thing which was interesting that you said earlier, actually, Graham, that you know, I've got Uranus sitting there as well. And you know, we bought this as a house from new 18 years ago. The furnishings are very modern, and so that kind of fits with that. And also I've got Pluto and Uranus there, and it did strike me, it's there in the 5th house. This is the space that I have raised my family in, my children, and it is totally different than the house I grew up in, which was very dark and quiet and not full of light and photographs and fun. So that's a comment that I wanted to make. And then just to end, you can see there, got lots of artwork in our house. We like to take photographs and get them blown up. And then it's gone full circle back to Taurus, because you've got really big plants, which I've got all over my house, and my lovely pictures of the Jardin Majorelle from Marrakesh, which I've got there. So thank you. I hope you've enjoyed looking at my house.
Thank you, Liz. I really like the fact that your IC is in Cancer, and it strikes me as very much family home. So you've got lots of family members there. You're very much connected to other families there. The ruler of your IC, because it's in Cancer, is the moon, and your moon is in Gemini. So you mentioned, you know, that you talk a lot with your neighbours. You've known each other for a long time. It's kind of, it has the sense of being a very safe, family orientated location, but one that's full of kind of life and community and and communication.
Yeah.
You're not all in your own separate kind of.
No, and
hiding away
what's
from each
really
other.
lovely about living in a close where it's literally you know, we are
Yeah.
as a community, and the kids, you know, they all rode their bikes and their scooters and they played, and it sort of everybody was communal. And you know, our neighbors who live opposite, they're slightly older, you know, they were surrogate grandparents to my kids. And everybody stops and chats, everybody, you know, has got the time of day, which is sadly lacking sometimes these days. So it's been a really nurturing place to bring our kids up.
I think that's a really nice evocation of Cancer on the IC and that moon in Gemini. And it's interesting the way you brought other elements of your birth chart into the presentation as well. Because as I said at the beginning, you know, this is an experiment, and obviously, you know, every aspect of our birth chart is perhaps going to have some influence, or it's going to have some manifestation in our homes.
Actually, I did think it was interesting that you said about, obviously it's not just very much not my house, you know, there's myself, my husband, and our 3 kids have grown up here, and I think I messaged in the email, you know, that it's very much their home still. They ping in and out. My eldest son's between a rental and buying his house, so he's back. He's 28, but he's back. We've had girlfriends move in for a year and a half. We've had, you know, move in, move out. We've had 7 adults living here at one point with 2 of the girlfriends.
Thank you very much again, Liz. Wendy, are you ready to?
I will unmute, yes, and
thank you.
have a go at sharing my screen. Okay. Great. I'm just so struck by how thoroughly different all these things are. It's fascinating. And as you can see, our house is quite different again. And I do think of it very much as our house. It reflects both of our charts, but then both of our charts are related, obviously. We've been married a long time, and this is our second house, and moving here was such a huge deal. It was my second Saturn return, and my husband had Pluto on the Sun, so everything about it was difficult. But then we got here, and it's lovely. So I haven't done the whole chart, but there's an extract here. And as you can see, we're both really very earthy. I've got Sun and Venus in Virgo. He has Sun and Venus in Capricorn. And here's a photo of our garden. This was a little while back when it was actually, we had some sunshine and the roses came out, and it was all very lovely. It's a really big, quite a big garden, and it takes a lot of our time. We spend a lot more time in the garden than we do in the house. And yeah, we're both gardeners.
I can see a love of plants there, Wendy.
Definitely, both of us. I mean, we've always gardened in our old house as well, although my husband knew a lot more about it than me. But there's food. It's so part of it at the top of the garden is, I think it's probably about the size of an allotment, that bit, or small allotment anyway. And we grow food. Another Jupiter and Taurus. It just seems, you know, there's no way you could not grow food with given that opportunity. We couldn't see it go to waste. We're Virgo and Capricorn, so if there's something there, we put it to use.
Right.
But indoors is rather different. Compared to the garden, it's relatively neglected. And we both love reading. We have books. We've both got the air. My moon in Aquarius, his in Gemini. To be fair, I think I have more books than him. He would certainly say so. But then my Mercury is square Jupiter, so there's a bit of abundance there, I think, going on. This is not all of our books, it's some of them. Oh yes, and I was going to draw attention to the hand knitted throw. My Virgo traits are evident all over the house, really. Handmade this and that. My husband makes things too, but different things, little statues, and he made a lovely mobile out of pebbles. That is such a Capricorn Sun Gemini moon thing to do, it seems to me. I found no difficulty in finding our charts reflected in our house and garden. It wasn't a puzzle, so that was interesting. I wanted to show you the cupboard under the stairs for the Virgo vibe again. With a garden producing so much produce, we can't see it go to waste, so I make jars of this and that, and they're very nice too. Although we don't really eat enough chutney. I make chutney because it's easy, but just don't eat enough of it. It builds up a bit. Anyone want some chutney? I've got plenty.
Perhaps we could do a swap, Wendy.
Yeah, we can arrange something. The other major theme, I'd say, is in our house is art. We're both artists. Art's all over the place. The family are all artists. We got their photos and paintings. So most of the art is ours. We don't really buy art because we want it to be ours. However, we like, the greats. We like historic art as well. So being independent sorts, we paint copies sometimes. And that way we can have a copy of, we've got a Titian in the downstairs loo.
Wow.
Painted by my husband. So that's amusing.
Wendy, I really like the colour of your walls, and I just wonder if that's a reflection of your moon in air, both of you. Because it's a very cool, calm colour, isn't it?
We didn't actually paint it that colour, but I have felt no need to change it. And in fact, the dining room was a sort of green, and I've painted it a similar blue, and I'm more comfortable with that. I do like the coolness. Yeah, I couldn't be doing with anything heavy and dark. Yes. And my husband likewise. Sorry. But it's cozy, it's got the fire, and I'm very, very lucky. I think the prominent Jupiter is blessed me. So I've got this tiny studio at the end of the garden, which is mine. That's my own space. And as I say, maybe a dream come true, because for years I had no space really to do what I wanted to do. I managed, but now I can spread out a bit, and maybe the Saturn conjunct Neptune in Libra sort of reflects that.
I wonder, Wendy, if it's connected with having moon in Aquarius, because for me, there's a sense of, engaging with other people. Aquarian can be sociable in a way, but it's kind of an intellectual interest in people. And I think Aquarius as a sign has a need for a certain amount of space. I mean, you.
That's so true. That's so true.
Space to think, really.
We both need space. His moon in Gemini.
Yeah. I think Aquarius is quite independent, and so there might be a need for that sense of ownership of one's own quiet space to think.
I think that's so true. I mean, I love it in there. That's my happy place in the studio. And I'm up there, and my husband's indoors doing something on the computer or something, painting. And we're perfectly happy like that, either end of the garden. So yes, I think the Aquarian moon and the Gemini, those moons are strongly reflected in the way we live, I think. Oh, and stuff, that's the other thing. Again, I think the Jupiter's playing a part there. We've got a lot of stuff. when we moved here, we had to have the biggest lorry that they make, and it was full of stuff. Half of it was plants, to be fair, but it was just full, and I'd already got rid of stuff. But we enjoy it, having it around us. It's, as I say, it's diverse collection. It's this and that from different periods, and there's pottery and there's a few antique things, and it's just stuff that we like. It seems to be partly what the house is for, is to have a place to set out our stuff and enjoy it.
But it doesn't look cluttered.
Does it not? Oh, good.
No, it still looks kind of airy.
Yeah, you can see the blue again.
Yeah. It's not oppressive or dark in any
It's
way.
a nice light house, actually.
Yeah.
We face south and get full light. And another advantage of the south facing that I personally find wonderful is you can see the skies at night. There's a valley in front, so there are no houses. Well, there are a bit. There are some trees in the way, but you can see a fair amount of sky. And it's a joy, yeah. And as I say, we're not very good at getting rid of the stuff. Maybe that Saturn conjunct Neptune makes me a little disorganized about that.
Well, as Margaret has put in the chat, your stuff is lovely.
Oh, thank you. That's what I enjoy about it, the beauty, which has been an interesting puzzle to me, really, about my chart, because you haven't seen the whole chart, but my Venus is in Virgo, which is not, and it's not in the 4th house, it's in the 2nd. So you wouldn't look at that chart and think, oh, that's very Venusian. But I seem to have lived in a somewhat Venusian way. Maybe the Jupiter being in Taurus, ruled by Venus.
Is
that
your
might strengthen it.
in Libra, Wendy?
It is, unless you go whole sign house.
Right, okay.
In which case it's Scorpio. And this is an argument for Placidus, I think.
Yeah.
Because my house doesn't reflect Scorpio, does it?
No, I'd say it looks very Venusian.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course there's that strong craft element as well, Venus and Virgo.
Absolutely, yeah, but because we're both so earthy, yeah. If we want something, we'll see if we can make it. That is my lot.
Wendy. Fabulous. Thank you very much, everybody who participated, Helen, Liz and Wendy. So this really will be a very rapid whiz through. So there's my chart. So I guess the key thing in terms of this presentation to note is my IC is at the very end of Gemini, and I've got Pisces rising just, and my moon is in Leo and it's conjunct Venus. It's also very closely square Neptune. So my 4th house is empty, but it's ruled by Mercury. Now, I bought my first house in 2002, and it was a maisonette, which is like a dual house for those of you from abroad who may not have maisonettes or know what a maisonette is. Where in Britain, it's like a house that's divided into 2 flats. The one I bought, we each had a garden. So the person upstairs had his own little garden and I had my own courtyard garden. So I was thinking about it. I've never thought about this before, but perhaps that dual nature of the home, which I lived in until 3 years ago with my partner, it reflects the Gemini IC. So this is it. It's not very prepossessing, but you can see my neighbour lived upstairs and I lived on the ground floor. And I think it's quite interesting that my front door was behind these steps. So my front door didn't face the street. And interestingly for me anyway, the house or the cottage I'm in at the moment, the same applies. And I wonder if that, well, for me, it resonates with my rising sign Pisces, which doesn't like to be quite direct. It's almost too intimidating for me to have a door that opens out directly onto the street. So it's kind of tucked away slightly, and also means that people might go past the house, which they did, without realizing that this actually was a separate property downstairs, because they saw these stairs leading up to the top. So it's kind of hidden in a way. And there's a view up the street on a snowy winter's day. So it's kind of Victorian terraces. My property was actually built in 1992. It was a kind of modern add-on to the existing terrace. And it was where a coal yard had been, oddly enough, but it was designed to fit into the look of the rest of the street. And it is close to the Bath Road in Cheltenham. Now, the Bath Road is just a road which has got shops in, but I wanted to live near there because it's quite a lively part of the town, and it's slightly separate from the rest of the town, and it's got its own sense of community, and it has nice little independent shops and a couple of supermarkets, and it had lots of coffee shops, which was quite unusual at that stage. It was before coffee shops really took off. And this is a picture of the Bath Road in 2012, just before a bus or a coach, which had in it somebody who was holding the Olympic flame as it processed around the country. So it came into Cheltenham one day on a lovely sunny summer's day, and loads of people turned up to see it. So the Bath Road was certainly never normally this crowded, but that was a pretty exceptional sort of day. It had a nice lively feel, the area. And I think that relates to my IC in Gemini. I kind of wanted to be near life going on, people walking past the front window of the house. For me, my moon Venus conjunction, I actually relate it to one of my relatives. I had a wealthy great aunt, and she lived in Knightsbridge in London, which is a very wealthy part of London. And every Christmas we would stay there. My family were, we were not poor, but we were not wealthy at all. And so it was kind of a bit of an eye opener going to see the way my great aunt lived. And I kind of, she was kind of quite influential on me in many ways. And I wanted to create a little bit of the kind of feel of her flat in Knightsbridge. And of course, this is not opulent and it's not wealthy, but I love these. I wanted to have touches of gold and brass and kind of reflecting things and artwork, and touches of kind of opulent colours. That made my moon Leo feel very, very good. And this room is in kind of what I feel are sunny Leo colours as well. And that's actually a painting that my great aunt had painted for her, because she had a very powerful dream one night, and it felt so significant. She asked an artist friend to paint it for her, and I inherited that painting along with some other pieces of artwork like this lovely lamp as well. So I kind of wanted to honour my great aunt by having some of her things in my home. And we had a conservatory that faced southeast that was lovely and light. And I kind of very much valued, as Wendy and Liz saying, that lovely light. It's so nourishing coming in. So it would get the morning light. And this was my study. And this looks incredibly neat, because this was a picture taken for the estate agents when we moved. Normally it would look like a bomb had hit it. And I've got Uranus and Pluto in my 6th house. So it was never, ever this tidy, I can assure you. And it had a very small courtyard garden, and I couldn't find any photographs of it, unfortunately. But this was a tiny little pond that we made in it. So that's a whistle-stop tour, really. So I'm going to stop sharing.